If the winter had broken when it was meant to, Vesna would never have stood at the gates of the high hold, with 300 other unhearthed wolves waiting in the cold to be let in. And if the Alpha King had thought to open those gates a single season sooner, back when the snow first refused to melt, when the deadfall froze black and the packless began dying quiet in the drifts, she'd never have been angry enough to say the things she said. So when you get down to it, when the whole impossible business finally came apart at the seams, it was his fault, every last thread of it. Vesna had run the long routes for 9 winters, and in 9 winters, she had learned exactly one lesson worth the keeping. A packless wolf is a tool, and tools are not brought in out of the cold. They were brought grain tallies across the deadfall when the passes were sheeted in ice, and a hearthed courier would have frozen in the first mile. They were sent to carry the plague word to the outer holds, because who would miss them if the sickness took hold in their lungs? Vesna had carried all of it. She was the fastest long runner in Amrith, and she knew it the way she knew the scar on her own hand, without pride, without warmth, simply as a fact of the body, fast enough to be worth feeding, never worth keeping. So she had not meant to come to the hearthing at all. The hearthing came once a year on the first thaw, and in a good year the thaw came in the wolf month, and the packless gathered at the gates in their hundreds, scrubbed and hopeful, and the great houses of the hold walked the line and chose a runner here, a strong back there, a hearthrite given, a name written into a pack roll, a wolf brought in out of the endless cold and made to belong to something. In a good year. This was not a good year. The thaw had not come. The wolf month had passed into the lean month, and still the snow lay 4 feet deep against the hold's black walls. And still the packless came, because when a wolf is starving, hope is the last thing to freeze. "You're staring at the door again," Wynne said beside her. "I'm not. You've been staring at that door since the 3rd bell." Vesna made herself look at the snow instead, but Wynne was right, and they both knew it, so there was no use arguing. The gates of the high hold were iron and old as the mountain, and set into the left gate, small enough to miss if you didn't know to look, was a low wooden door. The runner's door. Vesna had gone through it 100 times, with a satchel on her back and frost in her lashes, and every single time a steward had counted her in and counted her out again, the way you count the spoons after a stranger has eaten at your table. "If they open it," said Pal, who was young and had not yet learned better, "I'm going first. I don't care what house. I'll take anything with a roof." "They won't open it," Vesna said. "They might. They won't." She said it kindly, because Pell was 17 and this was his first hearthing, and he still had the terrible brightness of a wolf who believed the world owed him a hearth. She remembered that brightness. She remembered exactly when it had gone out of her too, and she did not want to watch it go out of him. "Save your hoping, pup. The hold's not taking mouths this year. It can barely feed the ones it's got." She was right. She was nearly always right, which was another thing that had never once earned her a hearth. The horns went up at the 4th bell, not the low welcoming call that opened the hearthing in the good years. 3 short blasts, flat and final, the sound a hold makes when it is closing itself against the world. A murmur went through the 300 like wind through winter grass, and then a steward in the king's grey climbed the inner stair above the gate and unrolled a scroll he plainly wished he did not have to read. "By the word of Rurik, Alpha of Almrith, king of the high hold," the steward's voice cracked on the cold. "The hearthing is closed. The hold takes no wolf into its packs this season. Go back to your holds and your routes, and pray the thaw. There is nothing here for you." For a moment, nobody moved. 300 wolves, and the only sound was the wind and a child somewhere near the back beginning, very quietly, to cry. Then the gates began to close. They closed the way the mountain does everything, slow and without mercy, the great iron leaves swinging in on hinges as tall as 3 men, and the crowd broke against them like water, a surge forward, hands out. Voices rising all at once. "Please, and my pups, and I ran the Vor Road for you. last winter you owe me, and the king's spears came down level along the closing gap, and Vesna, who had seen a great many bad things, understood that she was about to see a worse one. She did not push forward with the rest. There was no use in it. She stepped back and back again, meaning to be gone before the crush turned to blood, and that was when she saw that the low door had not closed with the gates. The runner's door stood open, a hand's width, warm light behind it. And in the open gap, filling it, stood a man she had never seen before and knew at once, the way every wolf in the yard knew, the way her own spine knew before her mind caught up, because the air had gone taut all around him, pulled tight over the yard, like a hide stretched to dry. An alpha, the alpha, Rurik of Omrath stood in the runner's door with the firelight at his back, and out of 300 desperate wolves, clawing at his gates, he was looking at exactly one. He was looking at her. Vesna's first thought, cold and clear and entirely useless, was that he had no business being that beautiful in a year, this cruel dark hair, a hard mouth, eyes the pale gold of a winter sun that gives light and no heat at all. Her second thought, half a breath behind, was that she must be mistaken. Kings did not look at long runners. Kings did not know long runners had faces. He lifted one hand, unhurried, and held the low door wider. "Not you," said the Alpha King, in a voice pitched to carry just far enough. "You come in." And every wolf in that freezing yard turned to see who in the God's name he meant. There is a thing that happens to a wolf when an alpha's attention lands on it. The body decides before the mind is consulted. Vesna felt her own head dip, felt her eyes want to slide from his, felt 9 years of count her in, count her out, rise up, and try to walk her through that door with her tail low and her thanks already in her mouth. She stopped it. She wasn't entirely sure how. "Me," she said. It came out flat. "You." The king's mouth did something that was not quite a smile. "Unless there's another wolf in this yard I mean to be looking at. Come in, long runner. The door won't stay open for the pleasure of the wind." Behind her, the gates had ground to a halt, an arm's width from shut. Spears still down, 300 wolves gone silent and staring, and Vesna understood with perfect clarity what she was being handed. Hearthright, a roof, warmth. The one thing she had wanted so long and so hard that she'd had to teach herself to stop wanting it, just to keep her feet moving through the snow. It was standing open in front of her, a hand's width of firelit dark, and all she had to do was be the wolf who walked through and left the rest of them in the cold. She thought of Pell 17 and Bright, and about to learn better. "No," Vesna said. The wind took the word and threw it around the yard, and she heard it land in 300 pairs of ears, and she thought, quite calmly, "Well, that's done it now." The king went very still. "No," he repeated, as if tasting a word he had not been served in some years. "You've 300 wolves at your gate that ran your routes and carried your word and buried your dead in the outer holds, and you'll take one." She was shaking, and she made herself believe it was the cold. "You'll stand in your one warm door and pick the runner you fancy like a plum off a cart, and let the rest freeze on your doorstep so you can tell yourself you did a kindness. I've carried plague word for this. Hold, my lord. I've crossed the Vor deadfall in the lean month when your hearth couriers wouldn't put a paw past the wall. And I'll not be your one plum. Open the gate for the lot of them, or shut it on me with the rest. But I'll not walk warm past folk I ran beside." It was without any question the most words Vesna had ever said out loud at one time. It was also treason, or near enough, that the distinction wouldn't trouble the man swinging the axe. A packless wolf did not refuse an alpha. A packless wolf did not scold a king in his own yard, in front of 300 witnesses. There was a name for what happened to wolves who did, and the name was nothing because they were not spoken of again. She knew all of that. She braced for it. She lifted her chin the way she'd lift it into a killing wind, and she waited for the king's face to go cold, for the spears to turn, for the small gray steward to write her out of the world. The king did not go cold. For one long, impossible moment he simply looked at her, and something moved behind those winter gold eyes that she could not read at all, something that was not anger, and was not amusement, and sat, unbearably, closer to recognition. As if she had said a thing he had been waiting a long while to hear. As if he knew her, which was absurd, because no one knew her. That was the entire shape of her life. Then Rurik of Amrith threw back his head and laughed. It rang off the black walls, a real laugh startled out of him, and 300 wolves flinched as one, because it was the last sound any of them had expected to hear. He laughed like a man who had just watched someone kick over a table he'd been trapped behind for years. "Gods," he said, when he had it under control. "Gods! 9 years I've had this hold, and not one soul in it has told me no to my face." He wiped his eyes with the back of one hand, and when he looked at her again, the laughter was still in him, but under it was something level and sharp and entirely sober. "Steward, open the gates." The gray steward made a strangled sound. "My lord, the stores. We cannot feed 300. I'm aware of the stores. I count them every night with my own hand, which is more than most of my court can say." The king never once took his eyes from Vesna. "Open them and put the packless in the low barracks and the old grain hall. Half rations. It's a poor welcome, but it's a roof, and a roof is what she asked for." His voice dropped, meant only for her now, though the whole silent yard leaned in to steal it. "You wanted the gate open, long runner? It's open. Now come here." The gates groaned back. 300 wolves surged toward warmth, weeping and shoving, and calling out blessings on a king who a moment before had been shutting them out to die. And in the middle of all of it, Vesna stood rooted to the frozen ground, because none of this was how the story went. She had said no to an alpha king, and instead of dying, she had won, and winning frightened her far more than the axe would have, because she did not understand it, and Vesna had stayed alive 9 years by understanding things. She walked to the low door, because there was nothing else to do. Up close, he was worse, taller, warmer, the pull of him dragging at something behind her ribs that she'd have sworn was frozen solid. She stopped one pace off and looked up into that hard, laughing, unreadable face and made herself ask the only question that mattered. "Why me?" The king's smile changed, went quiet, went for just a heartbeat, almost sad. "Because I know your name, Vesna," he said, "and you've no idea how I could." And that was true. She hadn't given it. They put the 300 in the old grain hall and they put Vesna somewhere else. She noticed it the moment the low door shut behind her and the noise of the yard cut away to nothing. A page was waiting in the passage, a page for her, a wolf, who 3 hours ago had been counting her own ribs in the snow. And he bowed, actually bowed, and said the king wished her brought to the west, solar, and would the lady follow. The lady? Vesna looked behind herself to see who he meant. "There's no lady here," she told him. "There's a runner. Don't waste the word." But she followed, because a king had asked her a question she hadn't answered yet, "Why me?" and left her with a worse one hanging in its place. "I know your name, and you've no idea how I could." She had turned it over the whole length of the black corridor and gotten nothing. She had never been presented at any court. She had no house, no roll, no record but the tally marks the stewards kept of what she carried. Long runners were not known. That was the point of them. You could lose one on the Vor road and write it down as weather. The west solar was warm. That was the first thing, and it undid her more than she wanted to admit. The actual heat of a real fire in a real hearth, close enough to feel it in her frozen hands, and for one shameful moment, she could not think past it. Then the door opened, and the king came in, and the warmth of the fire became a small and distant thing. He had taken off the heavy gray. Just a man now, or the shape of one, in dark wool with his sleeves shoved to the elbow, and he crossed to the fire and stood looking into it with his back to her, which no alpha did with a stranger unless he was very sure of himself or wished her to think he was. "You'll want to sit," Rurik said. "You've been standing in snow since dawn." "I'll stand." "Of course you will." She heard the smile without seeing it. "You'd stand if the roof came down, out of pure contrariness. It's the most interesting thing about you, and I've met you for the length of 1 yard." He turned. In the firelight, the winter gold eyes had warmed to something almost human. "Sit. Vesna, I've a great deal to tell you and none of it is short." She sat, not because he'd said it twice, but because her knees, traitors that they were, had begun to shake in the heat, and she'd sooner sit than let him watch her fold. "How do you know me?" she said. Not a question now, a demand, laid on the table between them. The king pulled the other chair around and sat facing her close, elbows on his knees, and for a moment he studied her face, like a man checking a thing he'd been told against the thing itself. Whatever he found, there seemed to settle something in him and unsettle something else. "What I'm going to tell you," he said, slowly, "you're not going to believe. And when you've decided I'm mad or lying, you're going to want to walk back out that door and take your chances in the grain hall with the others. And I need you to promise me you'll hear the whole of it first. Because it concerns you, long runner. It concerns you more than it concerns any wolf alive. And I've waited 3 years for the gods to put you in front of my gate, and now that they have, I'll not have you gone before I've—" The horn cut him in half. It came from the high wall, and it was not the 3 flat blasts of a hold closing its gates. This was one long note, rising. The note every wolf in Omrith learned in the cradle, and hoped never to hear from the inside. The wall horn, the war horn, the sound that meant riders, meant the gate is threatened. The king was on his feet before the note had finished climbing, and the man who'd been leaning toward the fire, with sad eyes, was simply gone. What stood in his place was the thing the yard had felt. The air pulled tight. Somewhere below, boots began to run. A second horn answered the first, then a third, further out, from the ridge road. And that was wrong. That was very wrong, because the ridge road was the king's own road, and nothing rode it uninvited. "Stay here." Rurik was already at the door, and the voice he threw over his shoulder was iron. "Whatever you hear, whatever comes up that stair, you stay behind this door, and you do not open it. Do you understand me, Vesna? For once in your contrary life, do the thing you're told." "Who is it?" She was on her feet too. "Who rides the ridge road? My Lord Rurik, who's out there?" For half a heartbeat he stopped in the doorway, half in the warm light and half in the dark of the corridor, and something crossed his face that she would spend a long time afterward trying to name. Not fear. Something older than fear, and heavier. "The one thing," he said, "I hoped would come after you, and not before." Then he was through the door, and it shut, and the bar dropped, and Vesna stood alone in a warm room, in a strange hold, with a war horn screaming down the mountain, and the answer to every question she had going down the stairs, 3 at a time, in the dark. Vesna lasted 100 count behind the barred door, before her contrary nature won out over the king's iron voice, which was, she suspected, roughly what he'd expected of her, and precisely why he'd wasted breath on the order at all. She did not open the door. She had promised that much with her silence, and a runner's word held, even when no one was counting. But the west solar had a window, tall and frost-laced, and looking straight down into the great yard, and she pressed herself to the cold glass, and watched the thing come up the mountain. It was not an army. That was the first surprise, and not a comforting one, because a wolf who rides uninvited to a rival king's gate with only 20 at his back is a wolf who does not think he needs more. They came in dark furs on winter-shagged horses, unhurried, spread across the ridge road like they already owned it, and at their head rode an alpha. She knew it the way she'd known Rurik. The yard below her had gone taut a second time, 2 great pressures grinding against each other across the frozen ground. This one wore his gold openly. A pale-eyed wolf with a close beard and the loose, certain seat of a man who had never once in his life been told he could not come in. Where Rurik's power sat banked and quiet, this one let his off the leash on purpose, so that even the king's own spearmen shifted their weight, and would not have been able to say why. Rurik walked out to meet him alone. That was madness, and it was also, Vesna understood, the entire point. An alpha, who brings a wall of guards to his own gate, has already lost the yard. She could not hear the words through the glass. She did not need most of them. She watched the mounted alpha spread his hands in a wide, mocking sweep that took in the black walls, the closed gates, the whole starving hold, and she watched him laugh, and she watched Rurik stand very still and not laugh back. Then the rider leaned down from his saddle and said something short, and Rurik's shoulders changed, only a little, only the way a drawn bow changes when the string is knocked. And the rider straightened, well satisfied, like a man who had found the one loose stone in a wall and set his thumb on it. Then, because the gods were not done being unkind, the mounted alpha lifted his pale gaze from the king, up the black face of the keep, and found a window, found her. Across all that cold air his eyes locked on Vesna's, and his mouth curved, slow and knowing, and he touched 2 fingers to his brow in a little salute, meant for no one in that yard but her. She stepped back from the glass so fast, she cracked her elbow on the chair. He knew her too. Gods help her, that one knew her too. The bar scraped. Vesna spun, blade hand dropping to a knife she no longer carried, and it was only when, wild-eyed, shoved through the door by a gray-faced page who plainly could not decide which of the day's terrors frightened him more. "You mad creature," Wynne breathed, crossing the room to grip her arms. "You told the king no. In the yard, in front of the whole world. Half the grain hall thinks you're a hero, and the other half won't stand near you, for fear of catching whatever killed your sense." Her hands tightened. "But that's not Vesna. Do you know who that is down there?" "No. That's the Vor. That's their alpha come in person. No herald, no leave asked. Up the king's own road." Wynne's voice dropped, though there was no one to hear. "They're saying he's come to press an old claim on the hold, a debt claim. Something owed, since before either of them held their seats. And they're saying—" She stopped. "Say it." "They're saying the king pulled a packless runner out of the hearthing crowd this morning, like she was made of glass, and not 4 hours later, the Vor came riding for what they're owed." Wynne searched her face. "That's you. Whatever's owed. It's you, isn't it? You saw him look at you just now. I saw it from the door. And there it was. The thing Vesna had spent 9 careful years making certain no one ever had cause to want, to be known. A packless wolf stayed alive by being weather, by being a tally mark, by being the sort of thing a hold could lose on the Vor road and not trouble to grieve. She had made herself unwanted so thoroughly, so deliberately, that she'd half forgotten it was a wound and started mistaking it for armor. She was owed. She was a debt between 2 kings, a marked coin 2 alphas both meant to spend, and the worst of it, the part that sat like a stone under her breastbone, was that she did not know why. She did not know her own dam or sire. She had no birthhold, no pack roll, nothing behind her, but the first cold morning she could remember, and Orel finding her half frozen in a snowbank and putting a satchel on her back because a foundling who could run was worth feeding. She had never once minded not knowing. Not knowing was safe. Now 2 kings knew a thing about her that she did not, and the one who'd sworn to tell her had walked out into the yard to stand between her and the wolf who'd come to collect. He came for her at dusk, and he did not come alone. Vesna heard them in the corridor first, the particular hush of a great many people trying to walk quietly and failing, and when the bar lifted it was not the tired man in dark wool who stepped through, but Rurik of Amrith crowned and cold, the grey back on his shoulders, his whole court pouring in behind him. Stewards, captains, grey-robed elders, she did not know. And last, walking like he'd been invited, the pale-eyed alpha of the Vor, close-bearded and easy, looking at the warm room and the runner in it, with the frank interest of a man appraising a horse he already believed was his. "There she is," the Vor alpha said. "God's Rurik, you might at least have washed her first." Dagon. The king did not so much as glance at him. He crossed to Vesna and stopped close, closer than the room could account for, and something in his stillness told her to hold her tongue for once in her life. "Long runner. What I'm about to do, I've no time to ask your leave for, and you'll want to strike me for it. Strike me after, not during." "Do what?" Vesna said. Rurik turned to the room, and when he spoke, he pitched it to carry to the last elder at the back. In the flat, ringing voice of a wolf laying down a thing that cannot afterward be unsaid, "Let it be witnessed, this wolf is under my claim. She is bound to the high hold, and to me, Rurik, its alpha, by my word and my scent, from this hour." He let it land. Whatever debt the Vor believes it holds against a wolf, already claimed by a standing king. And no foreign claim outranks that, not by any law wolves have kept, since there were wolves. The silence that followed had a texture to it. Vesna felt her own face go slack, felt the wound in her chest crack straight down the middle, because she knew the shape. She had lived inside the shape her whole life. She was being used. Picked up and spent a coin after all. Only now, it was Rurik's thumb on her and not the Vor's, and the fury of it nearly took her feet out from under her. Dagon only smiled. "A bold word," he said, unhurried. "The trouble, cousin, is that a claim is scent and blood, not shouting. She doesn't carry you. I stood near enough in the yard to know it. And so does every alpha nose in this room." He spread his hands to the elders. "He's claimed her the way a child claims a stick he found first, loudly, and after the fact." A gray elder cleared her throat, plainly, wishing herself anywhere else. "It is so, my lord king. A spoken claim uncarried is a claim contested. By the old law it must be consecrated before the hold, at right, under a full moon, before witnesses of both houses. Until then it stands unproven," Dagon finished pleasantly. "And a contested claim may be answered by combat, or by the passage of the moon. There's a full moon in 11 nights." He looked at Vesna, and his smile widened. 11 nights, little debt. Either your king consecrates his claim before then and I ride home empty and aggrieved, or the moon rises on a lie, and you come to the Vor to settle what's owed. I can wait 11 nights. I've waited rather longer than that already." He bowed to the room, mocking and complete, and let his men steer the court out ahead of him, and at the door he paused, and looked back, not at Rurik, but at her. "Ask him why," Dagon said softly. "Ask your king what he thinks you are. It's a better story than he's told you. I'd wager he's had 3 years to practice it." Then the room emptied, and the two of them were alone again with the fire, and Vesna turned on the king of Amreth with 9 years of swallowed rage, finally, gloriously, off the leash. 11 nights, she said, to make a lie of me look like a truth. You stood in front of your whole court and spent me. 9 years no wolf in this hold would write my name where it might be read, and now you've bound it to your own in front of every elder you've got. And for what? To win a hand of cards against him? She jabbed a finger at the door Dagon had gone through. You're no better than he is. At least he had the grace to call it a debt to my face, and not a rescue. Her voice cracked, and she hated it, hated the heat behind her eyes, hated that some traitor part of her had felt the king's step close and wanted, for one mad breath, to lean into the warmth of him instead of tearing strips off it. What am I, Rurik? He's the second alpha today to look at me like he already knows, and I am done being the only wolf in the room who doesn't. You didn't claim a runner just now. You'd not risk a war over a runner. So what did you claim? What did you really bind to your name in front of them all? Rurik looked at her for a long moment, and the crown and the cold went out of him, all at once. and what was left was only tired. "Sit down," he said quietly, "and I'll tell you what you are, all of it. I owe you that before I ask you, for 11 nights of your life." He dragged a hand down his face. "You're not going to thank me for it." "2 holds," Rurik said, "and 1 road between them. That's where it starts." He'd given up the chair and gone to the fire, and Vesna sat because her legs had finally quit, and for a while he spoke to the flames instead of to her, which she was coming to understand was how he said the things that cost him. Amreth and the Vor have wanted each other dead since before the walls were black. 3 generations back they were bleeding the whole range white over it, every thaw, another war, until the 2 alphas of the day did a thing wolves rarely do. They made a peace, and they bound it in blood, a hearthline, they called it. A single pack raised apart from both holds, owing nothing to either, whose children would carry the peace in their veins and pass between the Vor and Amrith freely, so that neither king could move against the other without spilling the one blood they'd both sworn to keep. He turned. As long as the hearthline ran, there could be no war. That was the whole of the pact. Kill the line, and the peace dies with it, and whoever holds the last of that blood holds the peace itself. To keep or to break. The fire popped. Vesna's mouth had gone dry. 20 years ago, Rurik said, someone tried to end the line, killed the pack in a single winter and called it fever, but one was carried out. A pup. Lost into the packless before either hold could find her, hidden in the one place no king thinks to look, because who counts the foundlings? His pale eyes came to her and did not waver. "You're the hearthline, Vesna, the last of it. You're the only living reason there hasn't been a war on this range in 20 years, and neither of you knew it, and the Vor has spent 3 of those years hunting you. And I have spent the same 3 years praying I'd find you first." Vesna sat very still. She had wanted an answer for 1 whole day, and she found now that she'd wanted a small one, a runner's answer, a thing she could put in a satchel and carry, not this. "That's why he calls me a debt," she said slowly. "To him, you're a lock. Hold you, and Amrith can't lift a hand against the Vor without breaking the peace itself and turning every hold on the range against us. He doesn't want you dead anymore. Dead, the peace simply ends, and we're all free to slaughter each other like the old days alive. And you're a leash on my throat." Rurik's jaw tightened. "Which is why he cannot have you. And bound to you, I'm a leash on his." She heard her own voice go flat and cold. "So, I've not stopped being a coin. I've only learned my price." Something crossed his face at that, quick and pained there and gone. "Ask me the rest," he said, "and I'll answer everything but the last of it. The last of it you'll have when the moon's up and the claim is safe. Because if I tell you now, and you run, and gods, you'll want to run. The peace runs out the door with you. Will you take that?" Everything but one thing, for 11 nights. It was not a fair offer, he knew it wasn't. And that, absurdly, was what decided her, because a man who meant to use her wholesale would have promised her the moon and kept none of it, and this one was standing there handing her a locked door and telling her plainly it was locked. "Terms," Vesna said. The corner of his mouth moved. "Go on. I'm no one's ornament. I keep my roots, my knives, and my own 2 feet. I play your bound wolf where the court can see. And when the 11 nights are done, whichever way the moon falls, you tell me the last thing whether it's safe for you or not." She stood, so she wasn't looking up at him for it. "Those are the terms, my lord. I'll not be spent gently. I'd sooner be spent honest." Rurik looked at her for a long moment, and then he did the thing that undid her more thoroughly than the crown, or the claim, or any of it. He inclined his head, a king to a foundling, as if her terms were worth taking. "Done," he said. "Honest it is, though I warn you, long runner, honest between us is going to be a great deal harder on us both than gentle would have been." She might have answered that. She never got the chance, because the last piece of the day chose that moment to fall into place, cold and quiet at the back of her runner's mind, and she felt herself go still. Rurik, the ridge road. She was already seeing it. The whole length of it, she'd run 100 times in the dark. There are beacon fires the whole way up. 6 of them, watchwolves on every one all winter, so nothing reaches this gate unseen. That's the first thing a runner learns of this hold, that you cannot come up that road in secret. She met his eyes. He came up it in secret. 2 score horse, and your walls didn't cry warning until he was at the gate. My lord, those fires didn't fail. Somebody put them out. Somebody in this hold went up your own road last night and doused your own eyes, so the vor could ride to your door on the very morning you pulled me from the crowd. The fire had burned low between them. In its light she watched the king of Omrith understand what she was telling him, and understand that she was right, and go, for the first time since she'd laid eyes on him, truly and completely afraid. That means it wasn't chance, he said quietly. Someone in these walls knew you'd be at that gate, and told him. The king of Omrith did not. It turned out, know the first thing about hunting a traitor, and had the sense to know he didn't. You run the roads, Rurik said. The next gray morning, spreading a map of the ridge across the war table, while his captains looked at Vesna the way cats look at a bird let in on purpose. You know the watchtowers, the shift changes, which beacon can be seen from which, and which can't. I've a hall full of wolves, who can hold a wall, and not one who can tell me how a man puts out 6 fires up my own road without a single watchwolf raising the cry. So, he straightened and looked at her, and said the thing no one had said to her in 9 years. Tell me what to do. This is yours. It should not have meant anything. It was a task, that was all, a thing to be done before the moon. But something in Vesna's chest, that had been clenched so long she'd forgotten it could open, opened, just a crack, and she bent over the map before anyone could see her face do something foolish. Someone had the shift roll, she said. You can't dark all 6 on one night, unless you know exactly when each tower changes watch, and take each one in the gap. That roll's kept by the warden of the runners. She caught the flicker on the captain's faces and lifted her chin. By oral, and before any of you says it, no, not oral. I'll stake my throat on it. She found the warden himself in the low barracks an hour later, and the sight of him steadied her more than anything had since the gate. Old Orel, gray at the muzzle now, who had pulled a half-frozen foundling out of a snowbank 20 years gone, and taught her to read a road, and never once asked her to be anything but useful. He gripped her arms and looked at her long. They tell me you told a king, no, and lived, he said gruffly. I taught you better sense than that, girl. You taught me to see a bad road before I'm on it, warden. That's all I did. Something moved behind his eyes, something tired and fond, and just for a breath, hard to name. You did, he agreed quietly. You always could see the road. He squeezed her arms once and let go. Watch this king of yours, Vesna. Kings hold you close for reasons. And the reason is never you. Remember who found you when you were worth nothing to anyone. Remember whose hand it was. I remember, she said and meant it, and would spend a long time wishing she'd heard it differently. They rode the ridge road at dusk, she and Rurik and 4 spears, to read the darked towers with her own eyes. And it was on the road, in the blue hour between the 3rd tower and the 4th, that Vesna's 9 years earned their keep. She heard the string. Not the loosing, the drawing, the small dry creak of a crossbow, taking tension in cold air off to the left where the rocks came down close. And she was already moving, already grabbing a fistful of the king's cloak, and hauling him bodily out of his saddle as the bolt went through the space his throat had occupied, and buried itself in a spearman behind with a sound she felt in her teeth. Down the rocks, she snapped, and then there was no more time for words. They came out of the blue dusk in dark furs, 6 of them, blades drawn, and Vesna had no knife, But she had a dead spearman's and she had the road, and she had the thing that lived under her skin, that the packless learn young. She took the first at the wrist, and turned his own blade into his belly. The second she put down with an elbow and a knee. Rurik was a wall at her back, and he could fight. Gods, he could fight. But he fought like a king, like a man used to space and honor, and she fought like weather, like a thing you couldn't get a grip on, and between them, the road went quiet and red. The last one ran. Vesna took him 3 strides on and brought him down and pinned him and tore the fur from his face to see the werewolf who'd come to kill a king. It was not a werewolf, it was a runner. Aklis. Then, a satchel strap worn pale across his chest exactly where hers sat. A boy barely older than Pell, with the road in his hands and terror in his eyes, and around his neck, on a cord, a runner's tin road token stamped with the mark of the High Hold's own courier line. One of hers. One of Aurel's. "Who paid you?" Vesna said, and her voice came out of somewhere very far away. "Runner to runner, who put coin in your hand to kill the king?" But his eyes had already gone past her to the dark, wide with a fear that had nothing to do with her blade, and he said only, in a whisper, "They'll know it was me," said. "They'll know," I talked, and then his whole body seized, and there was foam at his lip, and Vesna understood he'd bitten down on something the instant he was taken, and that he was more afraid of whoever had sent him than he was of dying. Vesna knelt over him a long moment. Behind her, Rurik had gone very quiet, and when she turned, he was watching her with an expression she couldn't read, and she realized with a slow, cold drop that he was not surprised. Not nearly surprised enough. "You knew," she said. "You knew it'd be one of mine." "I feared it," Rurik said. "I've feared it 3 weeks." He looked down at the dead boy with the Hold's own mark at his throat. "Someone is turning the runners, Vesna. Your runners. The one pack in this Hold that goes everywhere, sees everything, and belongs to no one who'd miss them. Whoever it is has been building this a long while." His pale eyes lifted to hers, and there was something terrible and gentle in them. "And you're not going to want to hear where the trail goes." There was a problem with a claim that was only words, and the problem had a smell. Dagon was right in the solar, the Grey Elder told them, not meeting anyone's eye. A claim is scent and blood. When you stand her before both houses at the moon, every alpha nose in that hall will lean in to know if she carries her king. If she does not, the right fails, contested, and she goes to the vor, and no amount of witnessing will save it. The elder folded her hands. "The claim must be true enough to smell. That much, at least, my lords, you cannot play act." So it was that Vesna, who had spent 9 years making certain no one stood close enough to learn her scent, found herself learning a king's. It was not what she'd braced for. She'd braced for something cold and transactional, a duty done in a doorway, and instead Rurik came to her rooms each night with the fire low, and did the slow patient work of a scent settling into another, and he never once hurried it or her. The backs of his knuckles down her arm, his brow against her temple, his breath at the curve of her neck, until his warmth was in her skin and hers in his, and the frozen thing behind her ribs thawed, a degree it had no business thawing. By day they hunted the traitor, and by night he taught her scent, and somewhere in the seam between the two, the wanting crept up on her like a fever she'd no name for. She caught herself watching his hands on the war table. She caught herself waiting for the fire-low hour and hating that she waited. He would set a cup of hot cocoa by her elbow while she bent over the shift rolls, not saying anything, and the small, unremarkable kindness of it, a warm cup put down by a hand that expected nothing back, sat heavier on her than any grand thing a king could have offered. She had been given orders all her life. She had rarely been given a warm cup and a quiet chair and a man content to work beside her in the lamplight and let her be good at the thing she was good at. "You've stopped talking," he said one night, low, his mouth near her ear, and she could hear the smile in it. "I'm cold," she lied. "You're not." His hand had found the small of her back. You're a wolf who spent 9 winters making herself into weather so no one could catch hold. And you've just noticed someone has, and it's the most frightened I've seen you. And you fought 6 men on a road last week without blinking. He drew back to look at her. Winter gold eyes gone dark in the firelight. I'm not going to catch you, Vesna. That's the whole of the trouble, isn't it? Everyone who's ever wanted you, wanted to hold you. I only want you to stop running long enough to be wanted. She should have had a knife for that. She had none. She had only 9 years of being a tally mark and a satchel in weather on a road, of carrying plague word so no hearthed wolf need risk it, of being fast enough to feed and never worth the keeping. And here was a king with his hand at her spine, telling her she was worth stopping for, and she did the most reckless thing she had ever done. More reckless than telling him no in the yard. She believed him. She turned in his hands and rested her brow against his, and the careful patience went quiet in both of them at once. She had been wanted for her speed, for her silence, for her blood, God's, for her blood. Never once for the simple, helpless want of her, and she stood in the warm circle of it now, close enough to feel his heart going hard as a hunted thing, and let herself, for the first time in 9 years, simply stop running. You could tell me to go, Rurik said, against her hair, low, giving her the door, the way he always gave her doors, open and unforced. You always can. I'll not hold a single one shut on you. I know, Vesna said. That's why I'm staying. And she reached up and drew him down to her, and the fire burned low, and the cold stayed on the other side of the door where it belonged, and for that one night neither of them was a coin or a claim or a lie about a moon. Only 2 wolves who had each been alone a very long time, and had, against all sense, found the other. Afterward, she lay with her head on his chest, and his heartbeat slowing under her ear, and thought, with the small, clear part of her that never fully slept, that she was in a great deal of trouble, not because it was false, because it was true, and she had walked her whole life on the certain knowledge that nothing warm was ever really hers to keep, and now here was a warm thing, breathing slow beneath her cheek, and she did not know how to hold a thing without waiting for the road to take it. His arm was heavy and sure across her back. He was nearly asleep, and in that loose, unguarded hour, he murmured into her hair, half a dream, 3 years I looked for you, and when I finally, and stopped, caught himself even in sleep. The old locked door swinging shut, Vesna lay very still, her cheek on the heart of the man she'd just given herself to, and felt the cold draft come off that one closed door and creep back into the warm room. The last thing. He was still holding the last thing, even now, even here. And some runner's instinct older than trust whispered that a man does not keep one door locked against the wolf in his own arms unless what's behind it is a thing that could take her out of them for good. 3 nights before the moon, the hold held a feast because that was how you told a watching enemy that nothing was wrong. Vesna had guarded 100 feasts from the cold end of a corridor. She had never stood at the warm heart of one in gray silk with a king's hand at her back and the whole of both houses watching her carry him in her scent. Dagon watched from across the hall, patient as frost, and lifted his cup to her once, as if to say the moon was still coming, and he was in no hurry at all. You hate this, Vesna said, low, when Rurik had steered her out onto the high rampart, where the music thinned and the night came off the mountain clean and cold. He was quiet a moment, looking out at the dark peaks. Hate is a strong word, he said, and then, because she only waited, yes, I hate it. I've hated it since I was 19 and they put the gray on my shoulders. The smiling. The being what they need me to be so they don't look too hard at what I'm not. His jaw tightened. Every wolf in that hall thinks I hold this range together by strength. I hold it together by you, Vesna. By one packless foundling and a lie about a claim, and if either gives, we burn. I've been so tired for so long, and there's not been one soul I could say it to, because a king who says he's tired is a king someone, start sharpening a knife for? What was left in his face was young and worn and unbearably honest, and Vesna reached up without deciding to, and laid her hand along his jaw, and felt his breath catch. "You're more than the smile," she said quietly. The man under it. "I like him best." Something cracked open behind his eyes. He turned his mouth into her palm, and then he kissed her, fierce and grateful, and something close to undone, and the world shifted under her feet. It was not the scent. She knew the scent by now. The warm, patient work of it. This poured in, through the place where they touched, another wolf's whole weight of feeling coming into her, like water through a broken wall. Relief. Terror. A love so large and so long held, it frightened her more than the terror did, and it was not hers. She could feel him, distinct and foreign and near, his heart in her chest, beside her own. Vesna wrenched back with a gasp, hand to her breastbone. The bond had taken. The lie had gone and made itself true, and every instinct 9 years had built screamed that a thing this real could destroy her, that she'd just handed a king the one door into her no one had ever held. "It's the scent work," she said too fast. "That's all. It's the right craft it takes. It doesn't mean," she watched the words land on him like blows. "It's not real, Rurik. Don't make it more than the right." He went very still. The open, undone thing in his face closed over, careful and distant, the courtly mask sliding back into place, a breath too late for her to pretend she hadn't seen what was under it. "No," he said quietly. "Of course, the right. You're quite right." A servant appeared at the rampart door, with a tray, 2 cups of dark wine, and murmured, "Your Majesty," and offered it, and Rurik, wounded and turning away from her, reached for one without looking. Every hair on Vesna's body stood up. She didn't think. Her hand shot out and struck the cup from his fingers, and it shattered on the stone, wine spreading black in the moonlight, and she had the servant's wrist twisted up behind him and his face to the wall before Rurik had finished flinching. "Don't," she breathed. She was already down on the wet stone, over the spill, her nose full of it, under the wine and the oak, the bitter almond and iron reek she'd smelled once on the Vor road on a poisoned bait carcass. Wolfsbane. Enough to drop an alpha where he stood. She looked up at him, kneeling, in the spilled wine and broken glass. "The 3rd time, Rurik. Someone in this hold has tried 3 times now, and this time they walked it to your hand on a silver tray." The color had left his face, but when his hand came down it did not shake, and his voice, when it came, was iron and low, and meant for her alone. "You will tell no one." His fingers closed on her wrist. "Not the elders, not your warden. No one. There's a rival king 50 feet away waiting for one crack to widen, and if word runs that the king of Amreth is poisoned under his own roof 3 nights before the moon, Dagon has his war by dawn." His eyes held hers. "Trust me. Just this once. I know what I'm doing, and I cannot tell you how I know. Can you give me that?" Every part of her that was a runner, trained to see the bad road and speak it aloud, said no. But the bond was still open a crack, and through it she could feel that his fear was not for himself at all, and she heard herself say yes, and hated how easily it came. He pressed his mouth to her brow, quick and grateful, and was gone back into the warm, and the music with the mask on straight, leaving her alone with broken glass and spreading wine and the sick knowledge that she'd lied to him about the bond and let him lie to her about the poison, and that 2 wolves keeping that many locked doors between them had no business being in love. She gave him a slow count of 30. Then she followed. She kept to the cold edges the way she'd been trained, and watched him smile and deflect, and slip at last through a low door into the dark of the old muniment tower where the hold kept its rolls and its records, and she watched the courtly ease drop off him the instant the door closed. She crossed to it. She eased it open. Rurik stood at the record table with a lamp turned low, and spread before him under his hands were the shift rolls of the runners, and a runner's tin road token, and a ledger, and a list of names in his own hard hand, and at the top of the list, underlined twice, was the name of the one wolf in all the world Vesna would have staked her throat on. Worrell. Rurik looked up for a long, breathless moment. Neither of them moved. Vesna, he said. Very steady, very careful. This is not what it looks like. Then tell me what it is, Vesna said. Because it looks like my king went through my warden's rolls in the dark, with his name underlined twice on a killing list. And I've a runner dead on the ridge road with the hold zone token round his neck. So tell me, Rurik, what is it if not that? He did not move from the record table. He did not reach for her. He had learned, at least, not to reach for her when she stood like this. It's exactly that, he said quietly. I've been hunting the wolf, turning your runners for the better part of a year, and every road I run comes back to the same door. The shift rolls that darked the beacons were his to keep. The coin in that dead boy's story ran through the runner's pay, which is his to hand out. The 3 wolves who came at me before you ever reached this hold carried 4 silver, and the man who could pass 4 silver into this hold unseen, on the courier lines, is the warden of those lines. Rurik's voice never rose. It's Orel, Vesna. It has been Orel from the start. I am so sorry. No. The word came out of her the way it had in the yard, flat and total. You don't know him. He pulled me out of a snowbank when I was worth nothing to anyone. He fed me when no hearth would. He's the one wolf in my whole life who— She stopped, because her voice had cracked, and she would not let it break in front of a king. Say you're wrong. Say it. Rurik looked at her for a long moment and did not say it. There's a thing I've not told you, he said instead, and it's not the last thing, but it's near it. When I pulled you from the hearthing crowd, I already knew what you were. I'd known for weeks you'd be at that gate. He watched her understand. The binding, Vesna, keeping you close, your routes, your roles, the ridge road, all my questions. I told myself it was to guard the hearthline and flush the traitor both at once. That a wolf who'd been near Oral her whole life was the surest thread to pull. Some of it was that. In the beginning, most of it was that. The floor went out from under her, and it had nothing to do with poison. You used me? Her own voice, very far away. All of it. Every question about the road, you asked with your hand on my back. You were fishing. You bound your name to mine, to keep the trader's own foundling where you could watch her. And I thought. The heat behind her eyes spilled over and she let it. Past, caring. Gods! I thought you were interested in the road. In me. Not all of it, he said, and now he did step toward her and stopped when she gave ground. Vesna. It stopped being that. It stopped being that so fast it frightened me. Why didn't you tell me you suspected him? If you thought me his creature, why let me near you at all? Because I never thought you his creature. Rurik said it hard, like a thing he'd been holding. You want to know how I cleared you the yard. The first hour. A wolf Orel had turned, a wolf planted to sit close to a king. Does not stand up in front of 300 witnesses and tell that king, no, and cost her master every scrap of his cover. You blew a year of his patient work to bits for the sake of strangers you'd run beside. Because you couldn't help it, because it's the truest thing in you, his jaw worked. That's how I knew you were clean. You were the only wolf in this hold I never had to wonder about. It should have warmed her. It landed like a blow, because trailing right behind it came the thing she did not want to look at. He taught me to stay small, she heard herself say, slow, sick, to want nothing, to be weather, to never be seen, never be missed, never be kept. She looked up. You think he made me that way on purpose? So I'd never wonder why the one wolf worth a war was content to be a satchel on a road. Rurik said nothing, which was answer enough, and in the silence her whole life turned over and showed her its underside. Every gentle lesson. Keep your head down, girl. A seen runner's a dead runner. Want nothing and nothing can be taken. You've no pack and you're better for it. Packs are just more throats to cut. 20 years of a low, kind voice teaching her to make herself into nothing. And she had thanked him for it, had built her whole self on it like a house on his floor, and never once, not once, wondered why a man would work so hard to teach a wolf. She was worth keeping hidden, that she was worth nothing at all. Unless the hiding was the point. Unless she'd been a card kept face down in a sleeve for 20 years by a hand that stroked her hair while it did it. It was the nothing that broke her, because some cold, true part of her had already begun, horribly, to believe it. No, she said again. But it was weaker now, and they both heard it. I won't do this. I won't stand in a dark room and let you take the only wolf who ever kept me and make him into a knife. Not on rolls, not on a list in your own hand. She was already moving for the door, because if she stayed, she would either strike him or fold, and she could not have said which. She feared more. You had weeks. You had my body and my scent and every road I know, and you never once told me the truth. Whatever this became, it started as a hunt with me for the bait. A bond doesn't undo that, Rurik, nothing undoes that, Vesna. She walked out. Down the dark muniment stair, into the cold corridor, blind with it, and she got 10 paces before a shape unfolded from the shadows where it had been waiting, quiet as a wolf who knew every road in the hold, and old Oral's voice said gently out of the dark, "There you are, girl. I've been looking for you. Come away from him now. I know what he's done. I know what you are. Let your old warden set it right. Come away." Oral said again, gentle, his hand out in the dark. "I've a sled at the low postern and a clean road north. He can't hold the claim without you at the moon. We take that from him, girl, and we take the whole game." His gray eyes were warm and steady and terrible. "I've protected you your whole life. Let me finish it." And Vesna, who had walked out of that muniment tower, ready to believe anything at all, if it meant Orel was still Orel, opened her mouth to go to him. Then her runner's ear, which never fully slept, caught the flaw. "You said his men rode secret up the ridge the night before the Vor came," she said slowly. "To meet Dagon. You said you saw the king's own riders take the ridge road that night." "I did, with these eyes. The ridge road was under snowslide that night. I know, because I was meant to run it and the watch turned me back at the second tower." Nothing rode that road for 3 days. She watched his warm face, watched it not change. And that was the worst part, that he did not so much as blink. No one used the ridge that night, Orel, except whoever went up it quiet to douse 6 beacon fires. And there's one wolf in this hold, who holds the shift rolls that say when each tower's blind. There's one wolf who can move Vor silver on the courier lines. There's one wolf who taught a foundling to stay so small and so grateful she'd never think to ask why he wanted her hidden. Her voice did not shake, and she would be proud of that later, when she could feel anything at all. It was you. All of it. The fires, the runners you turned, the boy who bit down on poison, rather than say your name. You've been building a war for 20 years, and you kept me in a snowbank's worth of debt, so I'd hand you the piece when you were ready to break it. For a long moment, the old warden simply looked at her. Then the warmth ran off his face, like water off a stone, and what was left underneath had been there the whole time, and she'd been taught since childhood not to see it. "You were never meant to be clever where it cost me," Oral said, mild as ever. "I taught you better. You taught me every road." In this hold, she was already moving. "You should have remembered I'd know which one you took." He came at her with a blade out of his sleeve, fast for an old wolf, faster than a foundling should have been able to answer. But he had trained that foundling himself, every turn and every fall, and her body knew his hand better than her heart had, and she took the knife arm at the wrist, the way he'd taught her at 11 years old, turned it, used his own weight, and put the warden of the runners face down on the cold stone with her knee in his spine. Before the guards Rurik had set on the stair even reached them, "You should have kept me smaller," she said into his ear. "You almost did." The moon rose 2 nights later, on both houses gathered in the great hall, and it was not the rite anyone had planned. They brought Orel out in irons, and the runner boy's road token, and the shift rolls, and the vor silver, and Vesna stood before the elders of Omrith and the lords of the vor, and laid the whole of it bare in the flat plain voice of a wolf who had run every mile of it. Dagon's face, as the shape of it came clear, went from lazy triumph to something cornered, because half of what Orel had built, he built with 4 coin, and a claim founded on a trader's war is no claim at all. When the elders turned their cold eyes on him, the alpha of the vor found he had, quite suddenly, urgent business at home. "The dead is dead, with the lie that fed it," the grey elder pronounced. "The vor's claim is broken, and the king's claim." She paused, and every alpha nose in the hall had already leaned in, and every one of them had already found what it sought. "The king's claim is carried, true in blood and scent both. It may be consecrated tonight, and the peace made whole." A murmur ran the hall like fire in dry grass. It was done. The peace was safe. The traitor was taken, and all that remained was for Vesna to stand at the moonstone and let the king of Omrith make the binding reel before both houses, and be at last and forever kept. Rurik stepped up beside her at the stone, and then he did the thing that no one in that hall, least of all Vesna, was ready for. "No," said the king of Omrith. The word fell into the hall and killed every other sound. "Let it be witnessed." His voice carried the way it had in the yard the day they met, flat and ringing and final. "I renounce the claim, freely, and before both houses. Vesna of No Hold owes Omrith nothing. She is bound to no wolf and no crown. The hearthline runs free, as it was always meant to, owing neither king, which is the whole of what the peace was for. And I have been too afraid of losing her to remember it." He turned to the elders over the rising uproar. "The peace holds by her blood freely kept, or it does not hold at all. I'll not buy 20 more years of quiet with a caged wolf. That's the very thing the old kings died to end." He had just given away the only leash that kept the vor off his throat. He had done it in front of the wolf who'd come to take it, and the court who'd counted on it, and he had done it, Vesna understood, so that whatever she chose next, no one in the world could ever again call her a coin. It was the most anyone had ever given her, and she could not take it. Because he had used her first, in the dark, with his hand on her back and a killing list under the other one, and the bond could be real and the sacrifice could be true, and none of it, put back the thing that had broken in that muniment tower. Thank you," Vesna said, and her voice was steady, "and that was the cruelest thing of all. You'll be a good king. You already are." She stepped back from the moonstone, from the warmth of him, from the open door of a life she wanted so badly she could taste it. "But I can't. I don't know how to be kept by a wolf who spent me before he ever wanted me. I'm sorry." And in front of both houses and the risen moon, the hearthline turned and walked out of the great hall, free and entire and utterly alone, and left the king of Omrith standing at the stone with everything he owned given away and nothing at all to show for it. The thaw came at last in the 3rd month after the moon, and Vesna watched it from the runner's door with the whole weight of the courier lines on her shoulders, because they had made her warden. She had not asked for it. The elders had come to her a week after Orel went to the cells beneath the old fort, and they had said the runners trusted no wolf, but the one who'd caught him, and would she take the post? And she had heard herself say yes, before she'd finished being astonished at the asking. She was good at it. She had always known she would be, the way she'd known she was fast, without warmth, as a fact of the body. She cut the rot Orel had worked into the lines. She saw the runners fed in winter and paid in coin no king could trace, and she wrote their names into a roll where they could be read, and no wolf who ran for the high hold that spring was ever again a thing the hold could lose and not trouble to grieve. She was free, and she was whole, and she had made herself a life with her own two hands, and the only trouble in the whole of it was the warm, patient thread under her ribs that would not die no matter how tight she strangled it. Leave a bond open, and it deepens, she knew that, so she kept it shut, and hoped it would wither, for want of tending. And it did not wither. It sat there, banked and quiet, and some nights when she was too tired to guard herself, she felt the far-off shape of him on the other end of it, and she pressed the heel of her hand to her breastbone, and told herself it was duty, and did not believe a word of it. He came to the runner's door at dawn, every dawn, the first time she'd nearly put a knife in him from habit. The king of Almreth at the low servant's door of his own hold, in the grey before the sun, asking the warden of the runners if she would take breakfast with him, and here the last thing he owed her, she had said no. She'd said it the next dawn too, and the next, and still he came, a king standing humble at a foundling's door, where every scullery wolf and stable pup in the hold could see him do it, and the court muttered, and he came anyway. "That's 40 mornings," Wynne said, one grey dawn, watching him walk away up the yard with his shoulders squared against the cold. "I've been counting. 40 mornings, a king stood at your door and gone away told." "No," she folded her arms. "He opened the gates, Vesna. Every packless wolf on this range has a roof this winter because of what you made him promise in that yard, and he kept it, and 40 mornings he stood at your door like a wolf, begging to be let in from the cold. You of all wolves know what that costs. He used me, he did, and then he gave away his whole kingdom's safety in front of both houses, so no one could ever say he owned you." Wynne's voice gentled. "You're the warden of the runners now. You spend your days making sure no wolf gets left in the cold. There's a man freezing at your own door every dawn, and it's the one wolf you won't let in. Doesn't that sit strange with you at all?" It sat very strange with her. She did not say so. Then one dawn, he did not come. Vesna stood at the runner's door, with the grey light coming up over the peaks, and no king in it, and told herself she was glad, and waited, and he did not come. Pell brought the reason with the morning bread, wide-eyed. The king was riding the outer holds, a long circuit, every hearth on the range, gone the whole of the spring. He'd told the elders he meant to be a better king than he'd been, to go and see with his own eyes how the far wolves lived, the way a wolf he owed it to had once told him a king ought. And he said, Pell hesitated. "He left word for you, warden. He said he'd not trouble your door again. He said you'd made your choice plain, and it shamed him to keep asking, and he'd respect it, and he was sorry, and he'd stop." The boy shifted. "He's gone, Vesna." He left at the 4th bell. And Vesna, who had wanted exactly this for 3 months, who had walked past that door 40 mornings certain that one day the wanting would stop and leave her in peace at last, felt the floor of her chest drop out from under her, and understood with a terrible cold clarity that peace was not what she'd been guarding at all. She opened the bond. She hadn't meant to. It simply came open, the way a hand opens when the thing it's been gripping is finally torn loose, and it hit her all at once, his grief, low and bottomless and the exact twin of the one she'd carried for 3 months, and under it, worse, the awful quiet of a wolf who had decided to stop hoping. It was the loneliest thing she had ever felt, and it was not hers, and she was on her feet and moving before she'd made any decision at all. She caught him at the great gate. The first hearthing of the thaw was that dawn, the gates thrown wide the way she demanded they be thrown 3 months and a lifetime ago, and the yard was full of packless wolves coming in out of a winter that had finally broken, and Vesna, warden of the runners, stood at the open gate she bought for them and looked at the mounted king about to ride out of it, and did the second most reckless thing she had ever done. "Rurik." Her voice carried the way his did. The whole yard heard it. "The last thing. You still owe me the last thing. You don't get to ride off owing me." He went still in the saddle. Then he swung down, and crossed the frozen yard to her through the streaming crowd, and stopped one pace off, close enough to feel, and he told her. 3 years ago, I was hunting the hearthline like a cold-blooded thing, he said low, for her a card to win my throne with. And on the Vor Road, in a blizzard that should have killed anything on 4 legs or two, I passed a packless runner who wouldn't take shelter, because she'd plague word to finish carrying, and who looked at me like I was weather. She'd wait out, and did not know she was anything but a satchel on a road. His throat worked. I didn't know what you were. I only knew I couldn't forget you, and when I finally learned the hearthline and that runner were the same wolf, I could have taken you that hour, claimed you, caged you for the peace, and been called a wise king for it. Every day for 3 years I could have, and I couldn't, because I'd already gone and wanted the wolf on the road, and I could not be one more hand that spent her. He held her eyes. That was the last thing, Vesna. If I'd told you I loved you before the claim was safe, and you'd run, the peace ran out the door with you. So I had to choose. Your freedom or the surest peace. And I chose to hold one door open and pray to every god I know that you'd walk through it because you wanted to, and not because I'd shut all the others. His mouth twisted. I held one door. I never once shut you in. That's the whole of what I have to say for myself. The yard had gone quiet around them. The risen sun came over the black wall and laid itself gold across the streaming packless, across the open gates, across the face of a king who had given away everything and asked for nothing but to be let stop hoping. Vesna looked at the open gate she'd fought for, and she understood at last the shape of what he'd done. He had not held a door to trap her. He'd held it because a held door is the one thing in the world that is not a cage. Her whole life, every hand that reached for her had reached to keep her. His was the only one that had ever, at ruinous cost to itself, held a door open and stepped back. "You're a fool," she said, and her voice broke clean in half, "to give away a kingdom's safety on the chance a runner walks back through your gate." "Best gamble I ever made," Murik said. "I'd make it again." And Vesna, warden of the runners, hearthline of 2 holds, foundling of a snowbank, who had taught herself for 9 years to be weather, reached out and took a fistful of the king's cloak the way she had on the ridge road when she'd hauled him out of a killing shot, and she pulled him in through the last open door herself. "Then stop hoping," she said against his mouth. "I'm done making you stand in the cold." They consecrated the bond at the next full moon, and this time it was freely given, and both houses came, and even the Vor sent word of peace, because a hearthline, freely kept, is a stronger lock on a war than any caged wolf ever was. The gates of the High Hold were not shut again in Vesna's lifetime. She saw to that. She was warden of the runners for 30 years and queen beside it. And every thaw she stood at the great gate for the hearthing and threw it wide with her own hands, and no packless wolf who came up the ridge road was ever again turned back into the cold, or written down as weather, or lost and not grieved. The runner's door she had gone through 100 times, counted in and counted out. She had struck off its hinges entirely. A wolf who belonged, she said, did not need counting. Rurik claimed to the end of his days that he'd won her the morning he held one door open in a closing gate. Vesna claimed she'd won herself, thank you, the day she told the king no in his own yard, and lived. They were both right, which is the usual way of it. He still, on the coldest mornings, brought her a cup of hot cocoa, and set it by her elbow, and expected nothing back. And she still felt the whole of her thaw, a degree it had no business thawing, because she'd finally learned that a warm thing set down by a hand that wants nothing is the truest door of all, and this time she meant to walk through it and stay.